Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. It sounds like Billy Napier, the Florida Gators, not done quite yet in the transfer portal during this winter portal window, as former Ohio State defensive lineman Hiro Kanu flying into Gainesville Sunday night, going to be taking a visit with the Florida Gators on Monday. Look, of course, there are going to be some of those people that screenshot his stats from Ohio State the first couple of years, post it to the message boards, post it to Twitter, and say, yeah, Florida's just going after the scraps in the transfer portal. That could not be any farther from the truth with a guy like Hiro Kanu. And it's really for a couple of different reasons. One, I'll just put my hand up and say, watching Ohio State spring games the last couple of years, I forget if it was the 2024 spring game or 2023. You watch them, you get a chance to see some of the reserves, some of the younger talent playing. Hiro kind of flashed. I mean, in big number 93, big body, really good athlete for the size. This is a guy that I think has a lot of potential just from what I've seen from him in the past. But I think more importantly, you have to add a little bit more context in terms of why Hiro Kanu hasn't played a ton of football for Ohio State over the last couple of years. One, he's still developing as a football player, only going into year four, redshirted in 2022. But more importantly, you look at the Ohio State defensive line. I mean, it's multiple guys that he's played behind the last couple of years that are legit NFL caliber guys. Some playing in the NFL right now, two of which, Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton, going to be going to the NFL draft in 2025. And then you look at Hiro Kanu as the football player. So this was a kid I remember covering out of high school. He moved from Germany to California, grew up playing soccer, only had played 2 years of high school football before going to Ohio State. This was a guy that we knew would not get on the football field early for Ohio State. There was still some development as a football player that needed to take place. You knew it was going to be a slow burn. And then you look at the other programs going after Hiro Kanu. He was on a visit to Texas this weekend. Georgia wants to get involved. Texas A&M wants to get involved. Look, these programs, Florida, Texas, Texas A&M, Georgia, they don't take scraps. You know this kid can play because there are a lot of other really good football coaches and really good programs that are going to be interested in Hiro Kanu as well. This would make a lot of sense for Florida for a couple of different reasons. One, I think Hiro Kanu is a significantly better football player than a lot of people are giving him credit for. Number two, look, I've been very vocal. I think Florida's checking a lot of boxes in terms of roster, where their roster sits going into 2025. If there's one question you still want to be answered is, hey, what does the depth look like on the inside of the defensive line? A guy like Hiro Kanu, who was a depth role player for Ohio State in the 2024 season, certainly would go a long way in mitigating those question marks. It's fun to talk about a guy like Caleb Banks, who I think is going to be one of the best interior defensive linemen that you see in the country in 2025. If you want to have a good defensive line, it's not about having one good defensive lineman. It's about being really deep so you can rotate those big bodies throughout 4 quarters, 12 plus games of a season. If you don't have depth on the line of scrimmage, specifically in the SEC, it doesn't matter if you have one or two really good players. You're probably not going to be that good of a unit. So Hiro Kanu, not only do I think has some big time upside in terms of the impact he can have for Florida, he certainly goes a long way in mitigating some of those concerns we have for the depth of this Florida Gators defensive line too. Now I want to get into Hiro Kanu a little bit more, talk about what I've seen from him over the last couple of years before we get into it. As always, to the Florida Gator fans, appreciate you guys. It's been really fun talking this football team on the recruiting trail, in the transfer portal, what we saw in the back half of 2024, the amount of support y'all continue to show means the world. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. And let's start with Hiro Kanu as the football player. And again, this was a guy that was a top 150 national prospect coming out of high school, commits to Ohio State. Why was he so highly sought after coming out of high school? It had a little bit less to do with how good of a football player he was currently, because he was rather new to the sport, had a lot more to do with what he could be as a football player. And you've seen him take those steps. When you see him in the spring game, the way people talked about Hiro Kanu when he hit the transfer portal, it sounded like Ohio State had a lot of confidence in this kid to be a really big force on the defensive line going into 2025. And so, one, I think you're getting a football player that not only I think is good right now, but is continuing to get better as a football player. I think, secondly, and probably the more important conversation you want to have is Florida in the depth on the defensive line, because you have Caleb Banks. Caleb Banks, bona fide stud. We know what we're getting on the inside of the defensive line there. Jamari Lyons is coming back from an injury. You're just not really sure what it's going to look like with him going into 2025. You have Dontre Robinson and Mackay, who you feel good about going into year two, but still, clearly works in progresses. To me, you might be going into 2025 with only one guy that you trust a ton on the defensive line. And that's not to say Dontre Robinson and Mackay and Jamari Lyons aren't going to be good football players. They very well might be. I think they will be. But you probably want to go into the season, or at least go into spring practice, fall camp, with a couple more bodies you can trust. And again, is Hiro Kanu going to come in and give you, 10 sacks, 15 tackles for a loss? No, I don't think so. But I think he can be a potential starter for Florida, and he's going to play that zero, that nose, which I think is big, because if you have Hiro Kanu playing that role, you can let Caleb Banks get a little bit more creative, play a little bit more three tech, let him operate with some more ideal matchups where you can maximize the impact that Caleb Banks is going to have on this football team. And so I look at it and say it's not going to be the flashiest name, and there are going to be some people on the message boards and Twitter saying Florida's getting the scraps. I look at it and say, one, I think this kid is a really good football player. More importantly, he is certainly adding to the depth of the defensive line. And I think what Billy Napier and Florida's, I would guess, strategy is, hey, let's go into spring practice. Let's see what Jamari Lyons looks like. Let's see what Dontre Robinson, let's see what Mackay look like. And then we will evaluate after that what our defensive line looks like. You can go grab Hiro Kanu. You're kind of heading into spring practice, fall camp in a little bit more of a comfortable spot. We'll see how it works out. I would not sleep on what Hiro Kanu can be for Florida. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.